And we're live. Welcome, everybody, to episode 9 of the Community CloudCast from March 2022. We are back at you this month with our special guests, Kevin and Marrell, joining us to talk about DevOps this month. But before we get into that, as usual, we'll give you a little news up front and where things have been in the Azure and Salesforce and Power BI space and whatever else it is that we come up with. So we'll drop some slides up here and we'll jump right into it. I want to say welcome, as always, to my fellow co-hosts, Paul and Jason. How are you guys this month?
Doing well, sir.
Good, man.
Jason, I see you have your partner in crime there with you.
Whole thing today, so you know.
Usually it's Paul's cat who joins us. So
yes, Nate decided he had to be a part of this today.
Wow, everyone's welcome. So for those of you who are new to the show, third Thursday or thereabouts of every month around noon U.S. Central Time, you can watch us on YouTube or Facebook. Of course, the recordings are available after the fact. I know a lot of you watch us after the show has aired live, so feel free to head on over to those channels. If you do hop on YouTube, please give us a subscribe and a like on there so we can get these elevated in the search results, because there is no amount of photographic manipulation for making thumbnails of any of the three of us is going to help us get higher in those search rankings. So we need all the help we can get. As mentioned, our guests this month are Marrell Sanders and Kevin Schenk. So, Marrell, let's start with you. Welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. So I've been in this technology space for, oh my goodness, I guess a couple decades at least now. Started off on the SharePoint side of things and stumbled my way over into DevOps that I do now. And so I enjoy it. Do a little bit of that, little music, hang out with the family. I got a new dog, so that's taking up quite a bit more of my time than it used to, I guess.
What kind of dog? I didn't see Facebook posts of your dog.
Oh, there's lots there. I've got a golden doodle, little golden doodle puppy who's I had no idea I was really getting another child, literally.
I hear that. Well, and Kevin, how about you?
Awesome. So I'm Kevin Schenk. I am currently with Accenture, but I've been working in IT for about 10 years. Currently solution architect in the Salesforce space at Accenture, and I've really dove deep into DevOps over the past couple of years, specifically in the Salesforce realm. So really happy to be here, and I'm based out of Tampa, Florida.
Awesome. All right. Well, we want to thank our sponsors as usual, starting with Aptogen, of course. We should have all of our connectors in the Power Platform space should be coming out of preview and into GA pretty soon. So look for that to happen. We'll have some new updates here in the next month or two. And we have a bunch of updates queued up for Salesforce, probably summer before we get to those, but we've got a ton. I think we've got over 20 new actions coming to Salesforce in our summer updates. You can look for that. Upcoming events. We have the M365 conference coming up in Vegas. Jason, I think you're going to be there for that one.
Yes, sir. I'll be there for the post-conference. I get in midweek at the conference, and I'll be there for post-conference on Friday.
And I assume that would be with our Comfort Canadian and your fellow bifocal host, Mr. John White.
That is correct, sir. Yes, we'll be there doing everything you wanted to know about Power BI, but we're afraid to ask.
There's probably still slots. I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing there's maybe still some slots to sign up. Bear in mind that when you register for the conference, you need to register additionally for the post conferences. Am I right on that, Jason?
That is correct, sir. Yes.
Yeah, indeed. Great. We also have Initech coming up in Irving. At least I've seen that on Sean's site. That would be, you can go to ShareCloud Summit, but I think it's initech.com. I don't think we're doing actually a ShareCloud Summit. I didn't get verification from him before I posted this slide. I think it's just going to be the Initech show this time around. At least we haven't talked about ShareCloud Summit, but we'll find out more on that next month and tell you for sure. Coming up, hopefully at the end of May, is the Thrive Conference in Slovenia for our viewers outside the United States. Great little conference run by Branka. Really picturesque place to go and visit. Small, but some really good information. A lot of the usual suspects typically there, Addis and Spence, and a bunch of the European crew. All my fellow Collab Days organizers are usually there as well. I'm hoping to make it this year if they're putting it on and they've got a slot. I hope to be there in May, possibly on crutches, but I will be there. if they give me a slot. And then, of course, we have Collab Days Belgium coming up in October. There will likely be a few other Collab Days events as well. They just haven't been announced yet. And I also think, aren't there some things coming up? I don't have them on the slide here, but aren't there some things coming up around here in, what is it, August, September, October?
So I know that 365 EduCon is going to be May 9th to the 13th in Seattle, and then in Dallas, August 8th to the 12th. And then I think Chicago's end of September sometime. Okay.
Well, I'll make an effort to get more of those things on this slide for next month. Also, don't forget, October is NACS, North American Collaboration Summit in Branson, Missouri. So that's coming up as well. So lots of things on the calendar. Most of these now will be in person, or at least hybrid, yay, and not virtual, as things have been recently the last couple of years. We've already done a couple of in-person shows recently. Everything has gone well, so I'm looking forward to that. And what is this we have here? Texas Dreamin'. What you got here, Paul?
Texas Dreamin' is coming up. Sorry, I know that's it's a local conference, fairly big. It's one of the local Dreamin' series that local groups put on for Salesforce. There's about 8 or 9 at this level. So it's coming up. It's oh gosh, is it Austin? I think it's Austin. It has been, yeah, Austin AT&T Conference Center. So I've gone in the past. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to go this year. I've got project stuff going on that's caught my schedule a little tight. But that's a big one that's coming up. If anybody's interested in going to that, there's usually a lot of people and a lot of information at them.
Obviously, we're going to need a bigger event slide now that things are back in gear for actual proper events.
Yep.
Right, Paul. So give us the latest lowdown. What's happening over in the Salesforce and outside of Microsoft Cloud world?
I have not heard a bunch of new announcements yet. And Kevin, you may chime in if you've heard anything new. The biggest news is the continued integrations and the continued move forward to pave pathways in between recent acquisitions. So some of the biggest news I saw was there's a release of some new Tableau pre-baked integration solutions and pre-baked components that'll integrate with Salesforce much more as a first-class component of the platform. We're hearing about Slack being getting more integrated too. That's still going on. I think that's where a lot of the work is going. Pretty much the standard fare in the most recent releases. Flow, its declarative programming tool has gotten a lot of support and updates over the past couple of releases as well. So really strengths. Haven't seen any new major acquisitions. Haven't heard anything new in the cloud and hosting provider or Heroku space. I think news has just been quiet, and news has covered other things right now. Kevin, are you aware of anything new that's come out recently that makes the headlines for you?
Down the road, I think Salesforce has announced DevOps Center, which I think is coming out in the summer 2022 release. So looking forward to seeing Salesforce offering for DevOps for low code migrations. So I think that's it that I can think of.
Yeah, DevOps has still got my my vote for next biggest investment by Salesforce. So I expect to see some action there for sure. So that's exciting. All right, thanks. That's all I have.
Jason, what's happening in Power BI?
Well, just before we click the go live button, the Power BI blog announced the Power BI March 2022 feature summary, and I haven't had an opportunity to drill through it because, well, we've been talking the entire time. So definitely stuff in here that's worth taking a look at. There are a couple of changes, some preview features, the new format pane. They've sort of flipped how that's going to work. From a preview perspective, general availability is coming in May, so it's only a few months away. There's new error bars in the reporting section, and there's an update to the Azure Maps visual preview. But also there's some other cool stuff in here around Teams notifications for Power BI goals. So you now get updates in Teams for through a notifications card, as well as a check-in to see what's going on. There's also a bunch of stuff in here about Power BI embedded around the embedded analytics. which is where we spin up an Azure capacity, and it's more for ISVs and specifically for the embedded space where you're trying to embed into something else to be able to host the Power BI data sets and reports. So there's a bunch of detail in here. Again, haven't had an opportunity to read how they've written it in the public blog post, so I don't want to go into detail on it at this point. But they did delay support for SSO data sources and embedded paginated reports until April. And the last one here, there were a couple of additional updates down in the other section. One is around quick create reports from SharePoint document libraries with just a few clicks. So there's some information about that one in here now as well as they've changed the default layout for Power BI Home. So just some different look and feel stuff and updated slicer defaults for accessibility improvements. And that's about it. Really can't go into detail on something I haven't been able to drill into too much yet, but definitely worth taking a look at. I know that there were a lot of good things coming this month that I saw in preview, but not knowing what's come out in the public versus what was in preview, anything they may have pulled, I can't go into any detail. So,
all right, sounds good. Sounds like there's quite a bit there to unpack. Maybe we can go into some detail on that next month.
Yes, sir.
Azure news, few things that I picked out, and actually something I wanted to talk to you about, Jason, because I didn't understand what this meant, and that's SQL dynamic lineage extraction in the Purview. That is not a misspelling of preview. That's actually in the Purview offering. But what is dynamic lineage extraction? Jason, do you know?
That's a new one. Dynamic SQL is obviously when SQL is being generated dynamically, right? But the lineage is usually what we think of from a view perspective. So I'm not exactly sure what these words mean in this particular order, to be perfectly honest with you. That's kind of an amusing thing. I'll have to do some digging into it, and maybe we'll come back to it here in a few minutes. Let me see what they actually mean by that.
Yeah, I couldn't quite unpack what they were meaning by that. It talked about queries and query plans and whatnot, standard stuff. So I'm not quite sure what lineage extraction. Does that mean anything to you, Paul? Paul, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up a Google definition. So, and I'm coming up with biology. So,
all right. So we'll move on from that one.
Yeah. No, sorry.
I did see that Defender has been released for Cosmos DB, putting some of that sort of real-time scanning in front of those databases. If you're using Cosmos DB, I don't know what effect that has on performance, but you have to think they did some extensive testing on that around the Cosmos offering. One thing that caught my attention that I thought was cool is the whole Project Flash concept. I remember hearing about this a while back, but this is they're starting to move asset monitoring up to a sort of a first-class view within Azure. So if you ever had to manage a bunch of virtual machines in Azure, even if you're using a third-party product for monitoring, such as a SolarWinds or Logic Monitor or something like that, it's still a great deal of effort to get those set up, installed, integrated, and all that to make it happen. This is real time in the portal. You can do KQL queries live to extract different types of data. If you're used to working with log analytics in Azure, this should be very familiar, but also direct integrations into the resource graph and including that with Azure Monitor. So it's trying to give you that holistic view, sort of what I call the data center wall, right, with all the monitors up in the data center of how all of your virtual machine assets are functioning. And I think the idea there is to extend that beyond VMs into other assets. We don't deploy a lot of VMs. We have a ton of Azure Functions, front door, and WAF policies and all sorts of things running around, routers and this and that and the other thing. And I'd love to be able to get one performance view of all of those. So I found this pretty interesting as an offering, and also being able to create my own dashboards, as it were, by putting in KQL queries for the type of data that I'm extracting. This is very similar to what we did in SmartTrack for SharePoint on-prem, where we take one pane of glass and turn all of the ULS logs and WMI information into a single holistic view of your environment in one dashboard, if you will, that allows drill downs and whatnot. From there, with some ability to slice and dice and get some additional data. So that's why it caught my eye. Thought that was a pretty interesting announcement. Right, so let's move on to our main topic this month, which is DevOps, a buzzword everyone is probably familiar with or has probably heard at least once or twice. Over the last couple of years, it's becoming really a hot topic. So why don't we start with, for those who are a bit unfamiliar or not entirely sure, Marrell, why don't you give us your definition of what is DevOps and why should people care?
Sure. So DevOps, and again, like I said, I stumbled into this a few years ago, so I'm still kind of wandering around the pasture with it. DevOps to me, it's really kind of become a lot of automation. It's become a lot of more of services, microservices. Primarily, we would build infrastructure, obviously, put physical boxes out or get a bunch of VMs, things like that on-prem, but kind of going to the cloud and using microservices and things like that to really cut down on, well, I want to say cut down on cost, but sometimes that's not always accurate. But finding ways to actually to split these services up. So we're talking about things like, I think you mentioned earlier, Azure Front Door, some type of app services that are out there, application services plans. There's SQL services, not necessarily having to build entire SQL instances out there. So it's ways to kind of build these new methods of technology to still support, I guess, really honestly, to really bring about kind of new ways to build apps. But it's the services, it's the monitoring of these tools, because once you get them out there in the cloud, it's okay. What do I do? How do I keep track of all this stuff and make sure this hasn't caught on fire and been offline for 2 months or a couple of days or whatever? Have customers screaming at you. So it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of the those other pieces. It's there's even some. I would almost reach out and say, there's coding languages. I mean, PowerShell, being able to kind of utilize some of those tools for some of the builds, the automation, it's templates if you're looking at the Azure stuff, some of the other cloud offerings. So it's a lot of services and pieces that are kind of coming together to hopefully make it easier, faster to develop solutions, deploy code well, and to I think we talk about the CI/CD type stuff. I mean, it's a big integration of different pieces to hopefully help us get there faster, more stable, and then support it. We're out there in the cloud. So that's kind of my high level overview of DevOps, in my opinion.
Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Sure. I would say very much the same, really a way for development and IT operations to essentially coexist. In the traditional, waterfall or agile sense, oftentimes you kind of separate generalized development from IT support and maybe supporting the product that you're building. So it's about fusing the two pieces together and constantly being able to adopt CI/CD. It's another common term that we talk about in the IT world. Being able to plan and code and build and test all the way through to deploy, making sure that we're also doing the right level of monitoring. And I see a lot of new, it's kind of like a new terminology. It's the new terminology for DevOps you also might hear as DevSecOps, right? How do we integrate security into our processes as IT? We know that over the past few years, we're seeing a lot of code ransomware and vulnerability attacks with major corporations. How do we ingest good coding and security practices throughout our entire development lifecycle? And so you'll start to see the terminology DevOps and DevSecOps almost be used interchangeably within IT organizations.
Interesting. So my background with DevOps, as it were, comes from the Microsoft side on working with Team Foundation Server and eventually Azure DevOps, and going from just building stuff by myself and then sharing it or putting it on a test server like Marrell mentioned, where multiple access and we run the code and whatnot. But really, it's matured into every phase of the development lifecycle, from initial, not even planning, but just idea generation, right? Coming up with our thought process around what we're going to build, how it's going to build, into managing work streams for individual tasks, assigning deliverables, tracking those deliverables, doing things like gated check-ins where we build code and then we check them in against things that have been identified in DevOps as a task that you have to perform. And then that goes through the cycle of continuous integration and development where you've checked it in, it does a build, it does a test deployment somewhere, we run automated test scripts against us. Kind of the things we used to do manually, I guess. And now it seems to me what's grown up is a tool set around this process to make it well, either more manageable or more difficult depending on which side of the fence you come from. I know there's a lot of developers that aren't real fond of that, but from an overall management perspective, it gives more visibility into the process. How do you think the tools that we have now have changed the development experience, or have they?
It's a good question.
So, yeah, so some of them we've seen. So one of the and I get in trouble because I really enjoy Salesforce has a built-in change management system. Now it is really just for code push. There's not really a full DevOps around it. But I hadn't worked in any systems before that included change set management, where you had a console to go start pushing and connecting orgs, development environments together and push changes through it. Those were always add-ons. There was always something you had to go, when we did it in Unix, it was CVS, and then, Visual Source Safe. And, now with the tools like Capado and AutoRabbit and Azure DevOps, I believe all have components to go pick code up from someplace, but actually having it built into the platform kind of tells you where everything is going, that developers and development and dev process has to come center focus on any platform that is trying to hold its place in the world. It's a in-demand feature. And if you can't build integration with your code, then yeah, you'll fall behind.
From a tooling perspective in DevOps in general, we're seeing a large shift with more and more corporations going to cloud. Having technologies, I think Paul just mentioned Azure DevOps. We've seen GitHub and even Bitbucket and Atlassian are building their products and product tool suites to support more cloud native development and cloud native deployments. So we're seeing more trends of having a continuous integration tool be built directly on GitHub, right? Called GitHub Actions. We're seeing a lot more cloud native solutions that are here to support cloud native development, which I think is a big trend that we're seeing in order to provide more visibility and make it more easy to use for someone who may not know how to use Git or how to use a CI tool to perform their deployment. So we're seeing a lot more, I would say, a lot more growth in this area to help individuals and developers adopt to these new practices.
Well,
now,
I think I'm the only one
of
in this group who's not a developer, and so I'm gonna come at this from the IT pro background that I come from, and for me, this is the bit on the bridle that we finally get to break you developer horses and make you actually feel like you love what you're getting out of it. Because let me tell you, back in the early 07 days with SharePoint, when we were building on top and we were doing all sorts of stuff, and it would take me 2 days to get code deployed, and you had to have 5 environments just to make sure that the developers didn't break everything in the world and all of this. That now I'm in the middle of architecting a solution, and the developers came and said, "Oh, we should have 4 environments." And I looked at them and I said, "Why?" I said, "You're going to use CI/CD coming out of Azure DevOps. Why do you need 4 environments?" Like, we're literally, and Eric and I had this conversation on a call last week. It's like, shouldn't we just have 2, one for you and one for the users? And then they said, "Well, how do you do testing?" I said, "Well, you blow away everything and you redeploy from DevOps. You should never be touching anything. It should just all go in. So when you're done with your deving, you put code freeze in place, you deploy that out, then that becomes your QA environment once it's been validated. And because my development team happens to be in India and my business users are on the West Coast, the time zones don't even cross over. So literally, once you're done, we're done. You can code freeze. We can see, are we good? We do a full day of testing, and then we can deploy out to production. It eliminates the number of environments I have to have in that situation, but it also gives me better documentation than I've ever had, because I can say, before you can push your code, you have to make sure you've checked this in. You have to have a story. You have to have the user stories. You have to have this. I want to see an epic, and I want to know, like, follow through on all the things. By the way, so we're doing an agile script. Not a problem. What are you? Which work items are we actually getting done this month? Where are you logging your bugs? Oh, it's in the same system, and everything's there, and you live in that system, and you're used to it. Man, that just seems really simple. And you like it? That sounds like a win from the IT pro perspective to me, to be able to wrangle you developer types into actually, doing things in a proper, controlled way. So as the IT pro guy, I love DevOps. As a concept, is a beautiful thing.
I second you all the way on there. Again, SharePoint administrator coming across to this, but working with different teams who have different development styles and different methods, being able to go back. Because I don't know how many times I've had a developer give you something and say, okay, deploy this. And the question is, what's in the package? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I couldn't tell you what's in it. But basically being able to go back through, with DevOps, Azure DevOps in particular, seeing some of the handoffs or some of the different ways you can see what's there, what shouldn't be there. I've had scenarios where all of a sudden we're getting ready to push something and you notice, oh, someone put this pull, this pull request got pulled in and this shouldn't be here, and so you're able to stop that stuff before it even gets out to the cloud. So, but it's a unified system, and it's, unfortunately, I've seen where some developers have done it a certain way for so long, and it's uncomfortable at first, but once everyone gets on the same page, it just makes the whole system flow very well. Again, from the operations to the developers and everyone working together. So it's, I like
forcing that conversation to get on the same page, I think, is the critical piece. And that's developers. As a developer, I love working on my own code when it's done. Here you go, take it, put it in production, test it, do whatever you want to it. I'm kind of a POC, advanced concept engineer, and then I don't really do formal coding. But that's where coders, we like the streamlined experience. We also don't like having our toes stepped on, and developers like this too, or can appreciate it when you're working on different teams. And some of the DevOps tools we're working with help you enforce coding standards. Hey, this is going to be your style. This is going to be how you're breaking it down. This is roughly how many lines should be in a function. This is how much logic. This is how many forks of logic should be in a function or in a class, and you can start getting to that to where if you have to troubleshoot something or you take something over, you've got a better expectation of how they're doing that dev. Plus, you can track overlaps and dependencies in this, in the stories and in the code. So it does make you have to get out of your basement and become a more of a people person and a social developer, which hasn't necessarily been a skill set that hardcore devs have excelled in. But it should be making better products. It should be bridging that gap, and it should give operations a direct kind of one-to-one connection to what code is, and to be able to see and operate within the methodology.
So let's say you're just dipping your toes into this as an organization, and you need some DevOps. They've told you need DevOps. You watch this broadcast or some others, and you say, okay, I need to do this. I've kind of heard about it. It's time to start. Well, in the Microsoft world, we have one tool, DevOps, for the most part. I know there's others out there that people use, but that's primarily the big one. But Kevin, you're out there in the Salesforce world. Marrell, I know you do some stuff in AWS as well. How do you pick a tool? What's the right one for your organization?
Do you want to take it first, Marrell?
Well, for me, it's obviously I'm looking at some cost constraints. So Azure DevOps obviously has a free tier to get started with it. And so for me, that was kind of the easiest step to kind of go that direction. There's a lot of good integration with Visual Studio Code, which is another piece that we use. And then I think from our shop, we lean more to Azure anyways. So, or the DevOps piece. So it's kind of a no-brainer, I guess, from our side. Is like, this is what you're going to use, and there it is. But I definitely know there's some other tools out there. Even I know, like even with GitHub itself, right now some people moving over that direction, and but to be honest, I couldn't tell you if one's one better or the other. I'm definitely interested in kind of seeing how with Microsoft acquiring GitHub, is that right? I think that's correct. Kind of how they'll do some integrations between that and DevOps, or kind of which one wins out. I mean, we see that Microsoft did it all the time with different tools. Will they buy the same tool and different brands of it, and then one wins out? So, but yeah, I think if you're just getting started, I mean, there's definitely some free tools. DevOps is one of them. You can do a free tier and get started with that. So that's kind of where I go from it.
I'll give you my perspective on Marrell. I don't think you're going to see the two join. I think you're going to see the two keep separate. And this is just my personal take. GitHub's a community thing, and this was something that was a little difficult for me because I got asked, because I've been complaining to the Power BI product team for years. We need some form of DevOps integration for being able to deploy all these things that I'm doing in Power BI. I need Power BI reports are code. At the end of the day, I need some place to house them. I need automated deployment. I need to be able to do these things. I need DevOps. I want to use GitHub, and that was what I harped on at first. And they came to me and they said, well, which do you want? Do you want Azure DevOps or do you want GitHub? Because they're two different things. And I went, oh, geez. Well, the community guy in me wants GitHub because, that's community. Like, I have my own repos. I do all of that. But when I think about it, the business me uses Azure DevOps because we have a corporate repo there. We don't do it in GitHub. So like, I see the two as separated things. I see a parallel path where when you improve one, you should be improving the other. But it's sort of like, do you use Office 365 or do you use Outlook.com? That's the two, like there are improvements that you see with Outlook on the web coming to both of them, but they're completely separated things that, that are being done for different reasons. And there are more features to one than there are to the other, maybe. But, I truly believe that if Microsoft is smart, they will keep them separate for that reason, specifically, if for no other.
Kevin, what do you see from your side?
From a Salesforce perspective and determining a tool, obviously Salesforce provides some capabilities out of the box, but what we're seeing in, especially in enterprise level development with Salesforce, is that what comes out of the box in Salesforce from what they call change sets doesn't necessarily support multiple parallel development streams within an enterprise level. So oftentimes enterprises are looking to other tooling technologies, and with Salesforce being kind of its own beast and being a SaaS platform of software as a service, sometimes the standard DevOps tools that exist today, such as Jira or Azure DevOps, and a standard CI tool like Jenkins just doesn't cut it. So we see a lot of clients moving into the realm of looking at kind of pay-as-you-go products that are built specifically for the use case of Salesforce DevOps. Each product offers different offerings. It depends on, obviously, the enterprise's skill set in DevOps in particular. Some solutions are a lot more advanced to set up and actually function for Salesforce development, while as others actually have DevOps almost out of the box. Like from the moment you stand it up, you're ready to start moving with DevOps in Salesforce, and the product itself is built on top of a Salesforce. So with those types of solutions, we're really starting to see clients flock towards those because it's an easy ramp up, easy learning curve to get hit the ground running on day one.
So there seems to me and I know hardly anything about Salesforce, just the code we've built, and we're now trying to start to use it more as part of our process. Like we've got communication stuff that goes in and gets parsed out and creates contacts in Salesforce, and then we do email chains and stuff in there. So I'm starting to get my head around it. But when I wrote the code that we've turned into a managed package, it almost seemed like there was some embedded CI/CD stuff in the process, because I can't submit my package into, or I can't publish my package into my dev org unless it has what's 75% minimum code coverage or whatever that code coverage number is. And the first time I did that, I thought, whoa, why is this in my command line tool, right? This should be part of a CI/CD process. I don't expect this to be when I hit publish in my command line. So that was weird to me.
Yeah, and that's one of the ways to have a lot more kind of advanced DevOps. And what we see in Salesforce is we have a lot of what we call citizen developers, those individuals that sit in the business who can't, don't have the daily need to read lines of code or process a command on a command line tool, where some of these tools offer an interface where you can selectively choose what components you've touched within the Salesforce platform and say, I want to move this component from this org to that org, right? To move it to the next level. So these tools out there really help support those admins of the world that don't know how to code, don't know how Git works even from a source control perspective. And then it lets the tool itself will then process all of that and check it in to the master source control.
So that brings up another topic and something that Jason alluded to earlier, being not a developer guy. And that is DevOps seems to be this crossover between sort of IT project management and actual code development. And of course, it's we talked last month about the job market, and DevOps is way up there on the list. But it would seem to me from the outside, or being coming from the developer side, it'd be pretty hard to be a DevOps admin without understanding the development process and being able to write code. But Marrell, that's not where you came from. You came from the SharePoint admin side into DevOps as opposed to coming from the developer side. So how have you found that transition?
Well, for me, honestly and truly, several years ago, name dropping, Todd Clint had told us a long while ago that, hey, you better learn PowerShell because the way we used to do SharePoint, on-prem, is going to change. And so for me, I'm going
to have to take you out of the webcast now. You followed right.
Oh no!
So now you're limited. No, I'm just kidding. Todd, if you're watching, we love you, brother.
So he's on a beach somewhere. He's not paying attention. Don't worry, it's okay.
I didn't want to steal his quote. It was very accurate. It was very prophetic, if I can say. So really going to the PowerShell method and kind of picking up some of that. And honestly, I got to spend a lot of time with some of our developers and kind of figuring out some of the .NET stuff. And again, I'm far from a developer, far from a .NET, and all that. But I can get what I need done really using some of the PowerShell. And once I got kind of familiar with some of that, just some of the scripting within Azure and kind of understanding some of the scripts when we're building pipelines and stuff like that, kind of how that works, it kind of just starts making sense. So I think that was really what kind of helped me kind of move over to that direction. And then, outside of that, I've kind of started messing around with some Python stuff and get to see that there's some integrations between some of that stuff out there as well, which is super helpful. So I don't think you've got to be a .NET guru or some of the other code gurus. It's honestly, the ecosystem makes it a lot easier to kind of go from an admin or ops person over to some of that and be able to understand what you're doing out there and what's being pushed. So.
And Marrell, I sincerely apologize for insulting you that way and calling you a developer earlier. My friend, I'm so sorry.
Now I'm insulted.
Good. Yeah, that was the intention. So.
But this raises a point. It's been a bit of a difficult challenge to bring developers on into this process because, as Paul said, we like to write our own code and we don't want to mess around with all this other stuff. But my experience has been that using a good, well-integrated tool, like if it's in Visual Studio, then developers are more akin on the Microsoft side to just go ahead and click and use it. I see that's been very successful, starting with TFS and then moving into Azure DevOps. But from the IT pro side, how do we convince that part of the business that this is important to invest in? And not only is it important to invest, but it doesn't just happen. Like, somebody has to be in charge of this stuff, right? There's a lot of thought and planning and effort that has to go into doing this right. So Kevin, how do we make that case to the business?
It's a tough sell, but essentially trying to make it right with them as well is I guess trying to help them see the value that DevOps can bring to the organization, trying to essentially look at some of the methods at which we can really bring more value to them and what our teams are doing, and also from those who are business users that might need to use the tool, finding ways to upskill or partner with IT to really get a better rally around the tooling, and getting team members more equipped and comfortable with using the tools to support any work that's being developed.
Yeah, I want to say, so the integration to the BA component, tying directly to the code and forcing an exchange on the requirements gathering. So usually there have been very discrete meetings of requirements were gathered, they were put on paper, and they were given to the developers, and it was kind of a one-way street. And there's a lot of the, and like Pega built a code management that you couldn't write code unless you had a story. You had to start with a story outline, and then you could assign components, and then you could do technical tasks and execute them, and then group them forward. So bringing that in, to me, that's a big part of it, of the way a two-way street, and then it gets developed and the stories tie directly, as opposed to, I always have trouble breaking apart technical tasks and tying them back to testable routines, and forming those communications and kind of forming those and sticking to that and let people see what those atomic components are, really kind of helps shape the product line for development. So I think it's bridging some of the gaps and formalizing what needs to go on, or what probably happens in really expert teams with great Scrum leaders. But the tools are kind of putting those practices in place and making people stick to them.
I just want to shout out. Go ahead. I was just going to say, you mentioned the word great Scrum leader. I don't know if you said great Scrum leaders or not, but I don't know how many projects have gone super well with great Scrum leaders leading it, especially with different teams, working together. And I don't know how many have had horrible train wreck type outcomes when you have bad Scrum leaders. So getting that buy-in from the business and getting those Scrum leaders up to speed and comfortable utilizing systems, it's just a win-win all the way around.
That's really what I was about, where I was about to go. It seems to me that a DevOps admin is part Scrum Master, part IT pro, part business analyst, part developer. That's a tough skill set to bring together. How do we find those individuals or nurture those individuals? It would seem like a tough slot to fill.
Yeah, I think the core thing that you have to have in this to start with is a project management background. It's an understanding of how a project flows together. So what I've seen the most successful thus far from someone who's managing DevOps truly is somebody who understands the end to end of the project and sees it all the way through and can hold people accountable, as opposed to somebody with each of the direct skill sets. I think as people go through the process, they end up picking up the language, they end up picking up the mentality of the IT pro side of it, the developer side, the business side. But each one you need the deep expert in. So if you bring someone to the table with those specific skill sets to start with, they tend to focus more on their general area. And what I've found has been useful is finding someone who is more project management focused, where if you bring somebody to the table who's going to run the overall DevOps process, that is not a developer, that is not an IT pro, then they focus, and it can be more of the business user, then they focus on the goals of the overarching and not the down level details, right? And that's how a true DevOps process in my world is most successful. Is you end up with pillar leads. You have the IT pro lead, you have the dev lead, you have the business lead, who are take ownership of each of those pillars and then you have somebody who's managing the process overall. I found that to be really successful, but you know, I'm curious to hear what other people have found successful.
Within enterprises that I've worked with, we normally separate our Scrum Masters of actually making sure that what development is planning to deliver is actually what they say they deliver. And then we have a separate function for DevOps in particular to make sure that once code is properly tested and is properly working, they'll handle the migration of that code through higher levels of testing, whether that be through automation testing, regression, performance, etc. So I kind of see those as separate functions in the work that I do, but that doesn't mean that DevOps doesn't need to play somewhat of a Scrum Master or release manager style role to make sure that everything that's supposed to go as part of a release build is what's getting promoted up the pipeline.
So where should DevOps live? Is it part of the IT PMO? Is it part of, sorry, the IT project management office, not sling around even more acronyms. Is it part of the developer chain? Is it, or is it part of IT ops as a whole? Where does it belong?
I think the answer
I was going to,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I would. So I would, and skew, and kind of to answer this as well, a very functionally versed QA lead usually makes the biggest difference whenever I've been there. A QA lead that can see functionality, map it back to what the requirements, and say, yeah, even though there's no errors on your screen, this still doesn't do what we need it to do. We reviewed it, we tried it, and somebody that can go in. So my vote would almost be in a QA department, that you're guaranteeing results, you're guaranteeing quality, and you're interfacing at the satisfaction level with users. I don't know if everybody ends up having a QA department. That may be a refined team that we don't get to have in every project role or company that we work in, but that would be my vote. Sorry, Marrell, go ahead.
Oh, well, my answer is going to be yes to all three. You know, where is it really kind of the best place forward? But, you know, honestly and truly, I say if you're on the operation side, I think that piece, I don't want to say it's minimal versus, but I think Jason said it earlier, understanding kind of the beginning, the end of that whole project, that whole software development life cycle, that whole ticket. So I think that, in a sense, would really put more of that into the hands of the kind of that QA side or that BA side, something on that piece. I think that's where it would be most valuable. Obviously, developers with their pieces and operations, their pieces. But I think overall, having a strong group of I don't want to call them BAs or Scrum Masters, or someone in that space, that department, who can kind of overall or maintain it overall, or kind of be the lead or the driver of it. I think that's where it'd be quite valuable.
Well, Marrell, this is what you do on a day-to-day basis. Where do you fit within the org?
Fortunately, I'm on the operations side. So, and I can say this from, you know, with it being on this side. So I'm definitely more comfortable with the process and the tooling and getting in it. But the thing is, I don't drive all the projects. And so oftentimes what happens is I say we should be doing this way, or this is the way this process should be going. But if we don't have those other teams that are comfortable, especially, you know, with the people on the project side, the PMO side, then definitely feel like you're dragging it, like you're kind of dragging people along, where you're going to have them doing a lot of pulling it. And I think it would, projects where that PMO side is strongest and leading that and really running that house of it, I mean, they seem to go smoother, in my opinion. So,
Kevin, where are we in the overall adoption of DevOps as a whole? Is this still a nifty new idea that some people are trying? Is this mainstream enough now that it's accepted, but maybe not everyone is doing it? Are we still having to sell IT on putting this in place? Kind of where's the whole concept of DevOps today?
Sure, I would say right now, I feel like we're at the point where like IT recognizes the value and benefits of it. I think we have a lot of organizations that are still navigating their agile journey, this is kind of baked on top of, being able to show business agility, and getting to a point of, going through the motion of a 2-week sprint, or being able to do a deployment like once a month. It's baking DevOps on top of that I think it's kind of we're in the probably early to mid evolution of DevOps to where we stand today. But I think a lot of organizations are still trying to figure out how to bake this into their IT processes and be able to deliver more frequently to production. So I think there's still a long way to go. There's probably going to be another new buzzword, another new practice and terminology for those companies that are already on the bleeding edge. But I would say mass adoption of DevOps, I think we're still just in the getting started phase, personally.
Marrell, I see you're nodding your head. You agree with that?
I do, and I think some improvements that I could see is with the automation side. We talked about some of the testing, with the if we're trying to get faster CI/CD, and I don't want to use a giant social media name company as I could. I mean, where they're doing deployments daily, multiple deployments, daily or weekly, or if we want to get to that point, we've got to be able to make automation easier for the average person to be able to put out there. The automation piece, the QA piece. I know. Working with different groups where it hasn't been easy to test all the things. And unfortunately, that means there are going to be misses, there are going to be issues. And so you've got to run slower. And so I think there's definitely space to fix and make better the testing capabilities of some of the tools that are out there, and make it easier for a person who's just getting started in this to be able to build some of that stuff and make it work.
So Jason mentioned going beyond core code, right? Like semicolons and syntax and whatnot that gets compiled and deployed into things that are more built or put together, or I don't know what you want to call it. But in our space, we DevOps everything up to deploying our code out to our Azure functions and our Azure App Services. But beyond that, I can't push my connector into Power Automate from there. Right? I can't take it into the actual tool where it's used from that point. I can't update someone's managed package in Salesforce, right? They're going to have to do that update and redeployment. Are we still missing a piece here? Are we missing sort of the last mile of integration with the platforms that people are on as part of this process?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Jason. You want to elaborate?
I think well said.
Thanks, bud.
You asked the question, I answered the question. Like that was perfect. You're coming into my March Madness time at this point, Eric. I'm just saying. But no, so it is, and that was what my original comment was. I'm sitting here waiting for the opportunity to be able to publish. If I publish, if I want to be able to store Power BI reports in DevOps, there's no way of saying, hey, I want to deploy this out to this workspace. There's no way of doing all of these things, exactly what you just said. It's that, how do I take it to a fully managed CI/CD process to where it rolls all the way out to the end user for true adoption? There's so many gaps in the space for that. And I think it goes to the maturity, right? I think that's part of the point. And the thing that I will say is I would have rather we do things the way that they are now, where it's been, okay, let's get the IT pro world working, let's get the developer world working, let's get the BA world working, and let's make all of that work before we try and then push it out to the end user, because who's paying for it all at this point, right? It's the end user who's paying the bills, and they're the ones who are going to be impacted. And if we didn't do all of this lead up, and we said, oh, let's start over here. Let's start with the user. Let's make sure that let's just go ahead and start rolling things out. So we make a tweak and it rolls out. Oh, well, we didn't do any of the testing. We don't have any of the documentation. We didn't have any of the storage. We didn't do any of those things. Yeah, would have ended before it ever got started, right? So the way that it's been done, I personally applaud, because I think it's important to see what we've done be the way that it is. That's my take.
Well, fair enough. All right. So some final thoughts here. Let's set up a straw man here and say that like most of us on this call, we've had a career in IT doing various things. We want to get into this DevOps and or DevSecOps, which I think is a specific offshoot of that. That's important to bring that into the fold. Give us your thoughts on what things can people do now to build a skill set for being able to step in and say, I can be your DevOps administrator, or run your DevOps, or handle DevOps for your organization. Kevin, let's start with you.
Sorry, what was the question again? Repeat again.
Well, really about skilling up. If you're in IT and
Sure.
you want to skill into doing something with DevOps because you can see that's a good future career path, where would you start?
Looking online. Google could be your best friend, but essentially, I would, if you already are part of an organization that supports like an agile lifecycle management tool, try to figure out how you can help and support managing Jira, right, for your company. Look online for opportunities to grow yourself. I know in the Salesforce space we have what's called Trailhead. And Salesforce has a lot of trails that can be done to support your knowledge within a particular subject area. And in fact, I think there is a DevOps trail that can be followed specifically for DevOps within Salesforce. So really trying to tap into our friend Google, as well as determining if there's opportunities to find courses that can be used for upskilling. That's how I've learned the most, is by kind of tinkering and being a little hands-on with some of these self-paced curriculums that are out there.
Marrell?
Yeah, I'd say similar. There's a lot of information that's available. Google, Microsoft Docs, if you're kind of in that ecosystem in that space, has some great documentation that's out there, although it could use some help with some of the example stuff. But some of the SDS, understanding some of the SDS, software development lifecycle concepts, how that stuff works, honestly and truly, if there's some PMs or some PMO people that they're doing the work, see if you can shadow it. I don't mean like, necessarily at their desk, but kind of get a little bit of understanding of kind of how they're running a project, and just to get your more knowledge on that. I say me heavy on the operations side, getting familiar with some of the cloud-based microservices that are out there and how they work, understanding, what makes an app service different from a bare metal, web server, on-prem, how these different pieces work with different cloud services, kind of understanding some APM monitoring and stuff like that. And there's some DevOps journey. There's some blogs, there's some videos or things like that are out there to kind of give you a well-rounded high overview of how those different pieces work. And just like SharePoint in an old day, I don't think anyone knew everything. I think DevOps is a similar way. Not everyone can know every single thing, but definitely, being familiar and getting comfortable with multiple pieces is probably the next best step to get you moving that direction.
Awesome. Well, we're out of time. As usually happens, we get rolling on a topic and then find ourselves short on time. So we've reached the end of our hour. Of course, want to thank our sponsors. Paying attention to the various streams of information can sometimes be difficult, but thankfully we have Jason and John who bring us the Bifocal Show. Paul runs the Dallas Salesforce Developer Group that meet every month, so you can pick up some information from there. I assume that you talk DevOps from time to time on that, but also lots of other Salesforce related stuff. And of course, I want to thank our guests, Marrell and Kevin. Thank you guys for joining us this month. It's been a great conversation. I hope that everybody enjoyed it as we have, and we will see you all next month right back here. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Appreciate you all.